Let me just invite everyone to find a seat, and I'm sure there'll be others trickling in. On behalf of the King's University, I would like to welcome you all to our event this evening, which I am very excited about. My name is David Rudolph, and I'm the director of the Messianic Jewish Studies program here at TKU. And for those who don't know, our program is accredited. We offer degrees with concentrations in Messianic Jewish Studies on the undergraduate, graduate, and the doctoral level. And this year we have over 100 students in our program that are scattered across the United States and around the world. As far away as India, we have a student in India. The mission of our program is twofold. First, to train rabbis and teachers within the Messianic Jewish community. And the second part of our mission is to train Christian leaders who are called to be bridges between the church and the Jewish people, which we think is very, very important. As an expression of our twofold mission, we hold annual lectures related to the subject of Jewish-Christian relations. And that is why we have invited Professor Garber here this evening to be our speaker. Professor Garber is Emeritus Professor and Chair of Jewish Studies and Philosophy at Los Angeles Valley College. He has served as President of the National Association of Professors of Hebrew, and he is the founder and former editor-in-chief of two academic series, Studies in the Shoah and Shofar Supplements in Jewish Studies. Professor Garber established the first Jewish Studies program in a public school of higher learning in the state of California, and he is considered a pioneer of Jewish studies at two-year public colleges. In addition to that, I would just add that I had Professor Garber over to my home for dinner, and he saw the Encyclopedia Judaica and pointed out that he has 55 articles in the Encyclopedia Judaica. The list of his publications is extensive. Professor Garber's specialization is in the area of Jewish studies pedagogy, Shoah theology, Jewish Jesus, and interfaith dialogue. In 2009, a Festschrift was published in honor of Professor Garber entitled Maven in Blue Jeans. This is the Festschrift. This was followed by his, this was edited by Professor Stephen Jacobs. Among Professor Garber's many books, in 2011, he published The Jewish Jesus, Revelation, Reflection, Reclamation. This was followed in 2014 by his work teaching the historical Jesus, Issues and Exegesis. It is because of Professor Garber's specialization in the Gospels and Jewish studies that we are inviting him this evening to share his thoughts on the topic of his experience as an Orthodox Jew teaching about Jesus. A few notes. First, as the title of this evening lecture or event makes clear, Professor Garber is an Orthodox Jew, not a Messianic Jew. Professor Garber understands that Messianic Jews seek to bear witness that Yeshua, Jesus, is the Messiah of Israel and participates in the divine identity of the God of Israel. As an Orthodox Jew, he of course hopes that we who are Messianic Jews will one day make teshuvah and return to traditional halakha and with respect to Christology. And as a Messianic Jew, I of course hope that Professor Garber will one day embrace Yeshua with devakut in Meshichenu Adonenu, our Messiah, our Lord. In other words, we agree to disagree on this major issue while still maintaining collegiality and friendship. Baruch Hashem. Second, I want to honor Professor Garber for being a pioneer in the area of mainstream Jewish, Messianic Jewish dialogue. Under the auspices of the NAPH, the National Association of Professors of Hebrew, Professor Garber led two recent sessions on Messianic Judaism at the annual meeting of the SBL AAR that is, the Society of Biblical Literature and the American Academy of Religion. There were some in the Guild who did not want Professor Garber to hold these groundbreaking sessions. But he pressed on and did it because he believed in their importance. The papers presented at that first session were published in volume 57 of the journal Hebrew Studies in 2016. As I said, Professor Garber is a pioneer in the area of mainstream Jewish, Messianic Jewish dialogue. Most Jewish studies professors would not be willing to speak at a public event sponsored by a Messianic Jewish studies program, out of concern that it would damage their reputation in the wider academic Jewish and Jewish-Christian relations world, where Messianic Jews are often considered persona non grata because they existentially challenge the view that Judaism and Christianity are separate and distinct religions by God's design. Professor Garber, however, by coming here this evening to the King's University and sitting at the table with a Messianic Jewish colleague, has demonstrated a willingness to take that risk as a senior scholar in the field of Jewish studies. I honor him this evening for doing this, and all of us should as well. I might add that Professor Michael Visegrad, who is one of the great Jewish theologians of the 20th century, and Dr. Mark Nanos, a Jewish New Testament scholar, both gave lectures several years ago at public events sponsored by Messianic Jewish Theological Institute that were held at the Skirball Center in Los Angeles. And this summer, Professor Amy Jo Levine, an Orthodox Jewish New Testament scholar, will be speaking at the International Conference of the Union of Messianic Jewish Congregations. So, as one nice Jewish boy put it in 1964, before he found Jesus, Bob Dylan, the times are changing. I'd like to acknowledge Professor Donald Kim and Professor Charles Carpenter, who are here with us from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary here in the front. It's just wonderful to have you with us, as well as Rabbi Ari Waldman and Rabbi Sean Moyer, who are here from Baruch Hashem, and welcome. And also we have with us Rabbi Ryan Lambert from Tikvat David Messianic Synagogue in Marietta, Georgia, who is right there. And we also have Rabbi Jeff Feinberg and Pat Feinberg from the Graduate Institute of Applied Linguistics here in Dallas. I also see and where Pat and Jeff? They're right there. Welcome. Also, I see Dr. Boyd Luter, who is one of our illustrious professors here at the King's University. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Luter. Our program for this evening. Part 1 will be an interview with Professor Garber, so we can learn about his fascinating life and work as a Jewish studies professor who teaches about Jesus. After the interview, we will have a Q&A time in which everyone can participate. The first part of this Q&A time will focus on questions that relate directly or indirectly to what Professor Garber has shared during the interview. The second part of the Q&A time, if we have remaining time, will focus on any other questions that we have for Professor Garber. So, for example, if you ask him, what is your favorite baseball team? I'm sure he has something to say about that. So I encourage us all to write down our questions so we do not forget them. After the Q&A, we will have some closing comments and conclude our program at around 8:30 p.m. Well, without further ado, let's begin. Professor Garber, it's such a pleasure to have you with us this evening, and it is an honor to have you here. And we are all interested in learning about your life. Please tell us what kind of Jewish family and community you grew up in, And how did you get involved in reading the New Testament and teaching about Jesus?
First, David, thank you so much for the invitation. Is my voice able to be heard? Okay. I feel myself very unusually holding a microphone in my hand. I normally don't. I project without a mic. But since I'm a guest, I was told to please have one in hand, and so I am. Dear people, I come from a typical Eastern European Jewish background. By that I mean American-born, early 1940s. To be exact, 77 years ago, by several days, Zev Garber was born on that Friday night in the Bronx hospital called Prospect Hospital on March 1st, 1941. What makes March 1st, 1941 particularly important, in addition to being personally a biological note, is that the Hebrew calendar date of that year was the seventh day of Adar. The seventh day of Adar is a special date. It is the day, according to Jewish tradition, that the greatest of the rabbis, the prophet of the prophets, the one who spoke to God face to face, according to the book of Shemot, Exodus, Moses Rabbeinu was born. I was born on a Friday night on a Shabbos. My circumcision was 8 days later on a Shabbos at the Bronx Hospital. I am the son of a father by the name of Moshe Binyamin, and I can go on by suggesting there's another sign. If it does take place, you have a special guest sitting among you. 3 signs are necessary for a Messianic line: the birthday of the 7th of Adar, the Sabbath birth, and then the day of retirement has to be on a Shabbos. I ain't looking for death on a Sabbath day. It should be one of rejoicing. I entered this world with family that's Eastern European. I was raised with Eastern European Yiddish-speaking grandparents. My grandmother, when she passed, my grandfather, the Zeta, lived with us. And it was his living with us for quite a few years that I picked up the Yiddish that was spoken by my parents. And will say I'm one of the few people that can speak a Prusta Yiddish, which is a Yiddish of the street, more so than a Shena Yiddish as identified with Vilna, Lithuania. David has asked me my first association with the church, with Christianity. It has to be the Friday night table that my father officiated at. It has to be because my dad was a graduate from St. John's College, a university, I guess, in Brooklyn. My dad was a pharmacist. And over that Shabbos table, that Yom Kippur table, that Rosh Hashanah table, was a graduate picture of the class that my dad graduated from, with several priests and a cross overlooking an Orthodox Jewish table. That was probably the first of the signs, to say the least. Later in life, when I got interested in the curiosity about Jesus, I remember going to my first classes taught on the New Testament, taught by Christian scholars at the University of Southern California. My education went through the yeshiva world. I eventually went to Theodore Roosevelt High School in the Bronx, and my first degree was from Hunter College in the Bronx at that time, called that, and then years later known as Lehman College, Herbert Lehman College in the Bronx. My curiosity with New Testament is due to the fact that I shifted schools from learning academics in Semitics and Semitic languages, such as Aramaic, Biblical Hebrew, Syriac, Ugaritic at UCLA, and then for whatever reason, transferring over to USC, becoming a graduate school student on a PhD program in the area of church history and New Testament. Probably one of the earliest memories I have in a sense of humor, which somehow was identified by Zev Garber's moniker, was a seminar on Jesus in which the professor still among the living, Elton Epp, decided to cancel the class because one of the 4 graduate students in that class, Zev Garber, will not attend classes on Sukkot, on Tabernacles. When I was told of that honor, I simply said to the Protestant professor from Harvard, it's because of Zev Garber you're not having a class on Sukkot? What about Jesus? It was at that moment he was shocked. I think he didn't understand this. If the class deals with Jesus, I think you should not have a class during Sukkot, and that's the reason why you should cancel it, not because of a Jew who somehow is taking your classes. Elton Epp then got introduced to Bronx humor, which I think was implied by the statement from David Randolph. When I gave my first talks on Jesus, my Orthodox father, who was quite frum, quite Orthodox, quite sensitive, he was a doctor of the family, or the doctor of the neighborhood, the Bronx, New York, Puerto Ricans primarily, African Americans, and some Jewish families. When I said to my dad, I'm going to give a talk on Jesus, my father said to me, and his words still stand in front of me, He said, Ze'ev or Velvo, the Yiddish name, watch your words, watch your mouth. I said, Tata Favus, why do I have to watch my mouth? I'm talking to a college audience, albeit at a 2-year Los Angeles Valley College. I'm talking to a college audience. It was then that the wisdom of the shtetl came out of my father, and boy, they had a lot of wisdom to fill on the roof group. He said, how much more so you watch your words. You're talking to people who will be very confused, and you'll make them even more confused. I will never forget my father's advice. Watch your words. Fast forward to a talk in 1988 where I did not realize I was invited together with an Orthodox rabbi, together with my wife at that time, a convert from Mormonism, into a very large Lutheran church in Burbank, California, which was basically hosted by Messianic Jews, some of whom were my students. Esther Moshe Rosenberg, and Professor, would you please address the group? Not realizing it was a Messianic congregation that was meeting with other Christians in this church. In Zev Garber, I played the role that I played. I was the host. I said nothing until Esther, my student, said, could Zev please, and my students always call me by the first name, could you please address this question, which gave me the permission to begin to talk. And among my comments, I said, for Jesus to be seen as Messiah is not an issue. There are a number of personalities in Jewish history, false and more authentic, who are seen as Messianic figures, such as Bar Kokhba, the great revolutionary. Ben Kosiba was his given name, say the scholars. Bar Kokhba, son of the star, a Messianic title. A false Messiah, Sabbatai Tzvi. And one can even claim today the Lubavitcher movement, some of whom are expecting the return of the saintly Lubavitcher who passed in the 1990s. I said what I said. I saw nothing wrong. I did not realize in that audience was the Los Angeles Times reporter who came out with a headline the next day, Orthodox Professor Zev Garber claims Jesus is Messiah. I never would have seen that article until I got a phone call from a very powerful, very distinguished rabbi of the stars, Rabbi Magdan of Wilshire Boulevard Temple, and his successor, Rabbi Alfred Wolf, German refugee, whom I assisted as a teaching assistant at USC. How you doing, Zev? Rabbi Wolf. How you doing, Alfred? What's going on? I understand you gave a talk. Well, I'm glad you understand that. And then he said, what did you say? What do you mean, what did I say? And he began to quote me. I said, well, what's wrong with that? I didn't mean Messiah God. And then I learned another lesson. He said, Zev, you are so prominent. You've got to watch your words. You know what you're saying. I know what you're saying. But people who are just people are going to see a headline, and all of a sudden, you're claiming Jesus as Messiah. I learned a lesson from my pious Jewish father. I learned a lesson from my Reformed tutor at the time, meaning I assisted him, Rabbi Alfred Wolf. And then to know that you don't learn anything in one day, I shared with David and his family this evening an incident that happened maybe 8 days ago. Ralph's Supermarket is a major grocery chain in Los Angeles. They have a whole floor of kosher food, kosher this, kosher that, etc., supervised by a rabbinic student of sorts. He really isn't, but he's not an ordained rabbi. The mother of that student happens to be a student of mine whom we asked to re-enroll in class, so we have our numbers of Hebrew for Hebrew 2 this semester. In any case, I go to that place, I ask for that particular individual, and the woman who served me is a Catholic, judging by the cross on her chest, and I asked, is the rabbinical supervisor here? She said, what are you talking about? I said, is the Mashiach here? Or I said something like that. Oh, she said, you want to speak to the Mashiach? I'll go and get you the Mashiach. Let's try that again. Mashiach is the Hebrew word for Messiah. Mashiach is rabbinical supervisor. All of a sudden, my student, Laura, has a son who's the Messiah, and she's married to an Oklahoman, Okie, who doesn't believe in Judaism, but has no problem that his family is raised in practicing Judaism. How you say your words, how they are heard, is how we make the difference. And maybe for that reason, the talk begins this way. What you hear is not necessarily what is intended. What you see is not necessarily what is. And what you need to have is dialogue in order to have discussion. And in all situations, always with derech eretz, always with respect.
So on that note, you have that student you're referring to. Maybe you can unpack just a little bit more. What is it like being an Orthodox Jewish professor in a public college teaching about Jesus? What kind of students have you had, and what have been the greatest challenges and the greatest rewarding experiences that you've had?
David, let me begin with the most recent event which happened last week. Among my students, there is an Hispanic woman by the name of Castro, not related to the Fidel family. Her first name is Lydia, and for whatever reason, whatever ticked her off, whatever disturbed her, I, as an instructor, should be more sensitive. I am, and I feel sometimes instructors do more than they have to make sure their students feel comfortable. Why so? Last week, I'm waiting for students to come to class. We now have that class meeting again, only now it's going to be more extended time. Since they canceled, they now regrouped the class for us, so we're doing this. As I'm waiting for more students to come in, what am I going to do with the 5 or 6 people sitting there? And so I teach them a Hebrew epigram. Im tirtzu ein zu agada. If you so will something, it's not legendary. It's associated with Theodor Herzl, it's associated with the Zionist movement, it's associated with the Hebrew class that we're teaching, as we teach Israeli Hebrew and culture, among other factors. But Lydia, unknown to me, was very disturbed by this. At one point, she said, I don't have to hear this anymore, and carried on. I registered for a class in language. I expect language. I expect this, and on and on and on. I could have stopped that student, because after all, there are other students there, until one student, a mother, began to answer Lydia, would you stop talking that way? It's not really what he's doing in this classroom. He is teaching us the language, etc. That, David, is unusual for me to have in my classroom, but it's typical of what goes on. David, these are just illustrations of recent memory. Why does a Zev Garber bring in Jesus in any of his classes? Among the accomplishments I've accomplished was to produce and to bring about the first Jewish studies program in the state of California with a degree offering. Back in 1970, I began at Valley College. By 1971, we already had the mandate by the now governor of the state of California, who at that time was the president of the LA Community College District, a man by the name of Jerry Brown. I remember very distinctively the chutzpah that goes with my name. I sat with Jerry Brown. He sat with me. His question was, what is Jewish studies? And before I can delve into anything, I said, what is a Jesuit doing teaching or learning Buddhism? I asked the Jesuit priest, what's he doing with Buddhism? And that broke the ice, and Mr. Brown and Zev Garber smoked together, proper tobacco, drank coffee together, proper coffee, and so it began. 18 classes of Jewish studies, including classes that dealt with Yiddish literature and translation, Hebrew literature and translation, 4 semesters of Yiddish language, 8 semesters of Hebrew language, all in a 2-year community college. Among the visitors to Valley College, Isaac Bashev, a singer, and the one that shocked David here, who asked for the photograph, Menachem Begin, opposition leader, 6 months later, became, in 1978, the Prime Minister of the State of Israel, introduced by me before 2,000 people, the next Prime Minister of the State of Israel. Let me go on with this. Among the classes we taught was Talmudic Judaism, Second Temple Judaism. There's no way that I would not introduce the Jesus of the New Testament. The question now is, how did my Jews take to it? Quite frankly, they took to it okay. Some of them were disturbed by it. Some of the Orthodox students who we attracted as well had no problem as long as it was taught by a Zev Garber, so it made it kind of kosher. It is the Gentile student who runs into a problem when the Gentile students hear Zev talk about the Shema, for example, and which all of us know, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, but just using scripture. In the case of Mark, I have the text in front of me, you have the Hear, O Israel. In the case of Matthew, you don't have the phrase Hear, O Israel, as one takes a look at Matthew chapter 22. And in the case of Luke, you have the phraseology, but you don't have Hear, O Israel. And then when you look at the text itself from Deuteronomy, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, V'achavta et Hashem Elokecha, you have to love the Lord your God, v'chol levavcha, v'chol nafshcha, v'chol miyodecha. V'chol levavcha, with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. That order is not the order in the Synoptics. Mark is said to be the first recorder, and I will read. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and then with all your strength. Matthew, the Jewish contributor, doesn't bother with the word "Hear, O Israel." You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. And Matthew is missing might, strength. Luke, who's really the Gentile contributor to all this, has the proper order. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. And then he adds the word mind, but doesn't have "Hear, O Israel." When you have a group of Christians, such as a number of us sitting here right now, you probably have to be a little disturbed by this. Isn't it scriptural? And isn't scripture authentic? But then looking at biblical word of the Lord, as I know Christians refer to the scripture, you have three different orders at least. And then what to do with the word mind, and what to do with the absence of the word strength, and how do you define all this? What the advantage I bring to a class is I know some Hebrew. And the word for strength in Hebrew is koach, koach, koach. The Hebrew Deuteronomic text has bechol me'odecha. Me'odecha means with all your veriness. Veriness is not strength. And then I begin to hypothesize, David, this is how I teach. Why is the word strength, which means might, missing? May it not be that if Matthew is seen to be the Jewish of the synoptics, may it not be a commentary of the Jews who lost by the virtue of their might the war against the Romans. They are therefore powerless. And why do you even argue if the love of God will give you the strength when the love of God did not give us the strength and we lost the battle with the Romans? I'm hypothesizing.
What about colleagues and friends? How have they reacted to your academic focus on Jesus?
Holly and friends?
Friends, close friends
okay.
and colleagues.
The question, what you said, colleagues, I heard the word Holly for some reason. All right, and that's another problem. He said colleagues properly. I hear Holly. Before you know it, I'm into another spiel, and I didn't speak about that. Ladies and gentlemen, unless you know some Yiddish, you ain't going anywhere. Woody Allen could eat his heart out. I mean, I got to see an interview between Woody Allen and Billy Graham, who speaks very well, and Woody Allen was tongue-tied. Woody Allen is not a dumb man, but you got to know Yiddish to get through with a Woody Allen hour. Anyway, back to the question about colleagues. I would say the problem has been interesting. And let me perhaps put it in terms of academics. The Symposium on Messianic Judaism that Dr. Rudolph referred to took place with a Society of Biblical Literature / the National Association of Professors of Hebrew. Among the people who would not walk into that auditorium, after all, as a professor of Hebrew, is a student of mine. At least he dedicated a book to his mentor, Marvin Sweeney. With that last name, it sounds as Irish as can be. His dad is of the Anglo gang there, but he's Jewish by virtue of the mother's birth, and he's a proud Jew, Marv Sweeney. Marv Sweeney, among others, Michael Fox, the past president of Society of Biblical Literature, and a few other people, particularly of Reformed Jewish background, basically said to me, what are you doing? Why are you making them kosher? Why do you need to do this? My response, I can understand their feelings. I said, why don't you come into the audience? Why don't you come tonight? Why doesn't the Jewish community, just curiosity, come over, particularly if the ad has an Orthodox practicing Jew, which I am, by the way. And I make no bones about it. But there is that hesitation, don't cross over. You don't know how they're going to manipulate things. And that's something I can understand, but it's not necessary if you learn. And then I said to Sweeney, what is your problem? He said, it's not so much them, meaning they don't know what they're going to tell you. I can handle these people. It's you. You're making them kosher. That's what's happening. I then said to Marv, if I'm making them kosher, how much more so? Why do you fear this? How much more so? Why do you fear this? And I guess Jews as a group, like any other group, are very, 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 separated from the others. After all, Jesus teaches that, does he not? I taught today a class for the scholars on the Holocaust and the Shoah. We had a session on the Midrasha group, of which two of our friends are now visiting from Southwestern Baptist, in which the passage was, turn the other cheek, love your enemy, and love your friends. Don't do both. Don't love only friends, this type of stuff. And I guess the point is, doesn't it sound more benign to somehow deal with the other, to love him, and don't treat him differently? That is beautiful, but does it really work? And sometimes, can you put into place, could I love a Nazi? Can I love a murderer of my people? I've been raped by one of them. Should I bear that child into this world? These are issues that are not easily settled by quoting a biblical verse. But on the other hand, don't avoid these issues. The whole idea is you bring it out.
All right, so in terms of colleagues and friends, it sounds like there have been differing reactions.
Absolutely.
Some have been more difficult. Why did you write this book, The Jewish Jesus, and why do you think this book is important?
All right, this book came about because of two factors. One is a book before this book called The Passion. The Passion, Mel Gibson. Mel Gibson's passion made a tremendous impact upon everybody. It seems negative and certainly positive, but definitely negative. And it was at Purdue University, which I had and still do, but I'm now the editor emeritus of their Judaica line. They had a whole symposium, which I was part of, dealing with the Mel Gibson issue. We had a Shofar issue, the journal that I edited into recently, dealing with all this. And I guess it was that type of curiosity of how you can have a film made with Aramaic tongue, if you remember the film, and very well done, albeit a little loose ends, by a Jesuit priest teaching at Loyola College in Los Angeles, whom I invited, by the way, to a session that we had on the Passion, and he said, I'm tired of this already, and please don't ask me. I've done my duty, I've got my damage done, and I've been attacked because of this, whatever. It's that curiosity, and it's also a curiosity I have about Jesus, which I already shared with you. Not original to begin with, but F.G. Brandon's name, an English scholar years ago who wrote a book on Jesus the Zealot, or words to that nature. I was fascinated by that scholarship, and it was then that I was introduced to a Jesus that's not your church Jesus, but a Jesus with a sword. You have your three divisions, or possibly four, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Zealots, whatever, and the sympathy, it appears, of Jesus with the sword. That's what attracted me, and I guess the curiosity set in at that time. How much more so when you begin to discover that Jesus is authentically Jewish, as defined even by Christian tradition. His disciples are Jewish. Before you know it, you have a Jewish New Testament, and then you worry about the Gentiles.
How has your view of Yeshua, of Jesus, changed over the years as you've taught about him?
It's very simple. It went the typical Jewish way of don't get involved. Though admittedly, I wasn't raised that way. My father was the doc of the neighborhood for the Puerto Ricans, for the African Americans, the blacks or colored people, as they were known, as we all refer to people by these type of names, etc. I don't think I ever had the negative part of it. The curiosity probably started by me going to the 42nd Street Library, if you're familiar with New York, major library, major Judaica section, and instead of doing my homework, I basically spent 5 minutes there, walked the streets of Times Square, ran into street preachers, and I did a mitzvah. I listened to the street preacher who tells me Jesus to salvation, and I was fascinated by this. Occasionally I would ask a question, not realizing that my questions were above the street preacher's ability to handle. In any case, introduction to Jesus in a very serious fashion comes from the New Testament class as a graduate school student, and I was fascinated by the topic. Admittedly, it's critical scholarship, and admittedly, it was not the Jewish Jesus who we certainly see today. What David may be implying is the following. I do not exaggerate. The leadership in the writing of Jesus the Jew is dominated right now by 5 Jews, all of whom are practicing observant Jews, from the Amy Jo Levine Orthodox kids go to a Lubavitch Yeshiva, to a Zev Garber who's sitting before you, to Daniel Boyarin, who wears his yarmulke and whatever it is he does there, to other people such as Shaul Magid. It's dominated by curiosity of Jews who deal with this. But more important for David, and more important for you as well, you have major Jewish luminaries who have talked about Jesus in a positive fashion. You can start with the Rambam, Maimonides, whose incredible leadership saw a place for the Christian and for the Muslim, and saw the role of the Christian to do what it does to bring people closer to the Torah of Israel, albeit by the Christian message. You have a saintly rabbi, Rabbi Abraham Isaac Cook, first chief rabbi of Palestine, extremely important man, extremely mystical, who said of Jesus he plays a very important role, the role of leadership. And that is from the Orthodox chief Palestinian rabbi in the 1920s. You have the family of Soloveitchik, the doyen of modern Orthodoxy. As I'm now discovering from Shaul Magid, a grand rabbi, ancestor of theirs in the 19th century, wrote about Jesus. You have different Jews who write about Jesus, but in a way that we Christians may not feel that comfortable. It's okay. You're just beginning to understand the Jewishness of Jesus to a way that Jews have to be very sensitive to the Christians. And let me be very specific. If I'm a Gentile, I'm constantly living under the argument that I am second and not first. I read a Saul who's a Paul, and you blame it on Paul. He does not let the Gentile have first place. It's the Jew, and you cannot contest it. Admittedly, the Jew's gone wacko, but you have to understand God's covenant does not break. And once you have Jews writing on the New Testament and teaching we Gentiles how to properly read this and that, I'll give you an example, then all of a sudden the thing shifts. The example is very powerful. It says in Matthew 23, Jesus says, go to the chair over there. They sit on the seat of Moses and hear how they teach. A whole chapter how Jewish Pharisees are hypocrites, are this and that and that and this. That was all that about. Why am I bringing this up now? Because there's another Messianic leader whose book I reviewed, whose book I was critical of, who writes me a letter saying, I wish I took all your classes. The man's name is Stuart Dalvin, Hashivenu, and the whole thing called Converging Destinies. I have the review right here, and I also have his comments. David, you need to give me a few moments. I want you to read one of the major Messianic leaders, part of the Messianic group that David is now part of and much a leader of. He writes, Shalom to you. Shalom to you, especially during these days of Av. No Gentile writes this. The days of Av is the month of Av, destruction of first and second temple, 9th of Av, whatever. I woke in 3 ways today, says Stuart. I don't even know the man. First, I had a nightmare about a professional trajectory I am seeking to pursue. I saw myself driving a car up a steep mountain road, the engine laboring badly, and the steering wheel came off from my hands. Not good news. He's about to go over a cliff. Part of the dream he has. Having awakened, I picked up my iPhone and awakened a second time to the fact that you had published your promised review, which you sent to Mark Kinzer, the other of the trinity of leaders, David, Mark, and Stuart. And then he writes what a review it is. As I told Mark, I was amazed at your intensity of engagement, and also, Professor Garber, at your integrity. A lesser man would simply take the opportunity as occasion to impugn the integrity, quote, of those disciple Messianics, meaning, you're disciple. You don't do that, Professor Garber. I know you know it's true, and you've seen it done, meaning disciple Messianics, but not by you, sir. You are a very special man. As I told Mark, had I attended LA Valley College, I would have taken every one of your classes. I'm sure you are the master teacher, and he goes on and on. It's a privilege to get a review like that. And you know what I write about in this review? I said, Professor, whatever you call yourself there, Mark, Stuart Dalpin, I said, diverging destinies is not possible. Christianity, by stretch and by Alpha and Omega, believes in Christology. You cannot remove the Christ-centrific figure from what is called a Christian.
What other things do you think the Christian world needs to learn about Jesus? And what do you think the Jewish world needs to learn about Jesus?
I think what Christians have to know about Jesus is taking place right now. And the irony of this, it's Paul. If left up to Jesus, you ain't got a thing called Christianity. Jesus lived, died, suffered as a Jew. Jesus screaming, my job has not been done, is no doubt the role associated with him, not so much the prophetic one, but the messianic one, defined by the redemption of the people in the land, which was not then done historically, but a period of the crucifixion of the Christ. I'm suggesting to you that Christians, the more they get involved with the Jewishness of the apostles and Jewish trends and traditions, such as the one from Matthew 23, you sit by the rabbis because they will give you the tradition, albeit these are the rabbis who deny who Jesus is. You cannot have a messianic tradition or Christian Jewish connection without the messianic, without the Jewish element in all this. That's the one thing that Jews can tell Christians, and I think Christians are beginning to discover this. The problem now is, and this is Zev Garber, I don't want the Christians to become Jews. I want you to be Christians. For God's sakes. It's called a covenantal theory. Jews have that by their ethnicity. You have it by the spirituality and ideology. You have a job to do. And I guess what's terribly important is why we Messianics feel that Jewish connection.
By the way, you said we Messianics. Have you crossed over?
Good observation. It took in moments. Ladies and gentlemen, David is always at. Zev Garber talks this way. We Christians, we blacks, we Messianics. If you don't listen to my language carefully, that's how I talk. You now get very confused. Just when you think you label me, I shift you around.
I hope there's a reporter somewhere who can kind of. But how about the Jewish world? Like, what do you think the Jewish world needs to learn about Yeshua, about Jesus?
Okay, I think the first thing the Jewish world is learning right now is how faithful evangelical Christians, those who are believers in Jesus, Yeshua, are essentially supporters of Israel. You've got a major Zionist activist right over here in Dallas somewhere by the name of Jim Hagee. I see an interview with him. I'm saying to myself, what's he, the Prime Minister of Israel? He sits in his chair in his church over there with an Israeli flag on the left and an American flag on the right. There is the picture of our President, Donald Trump, announcing the movement of the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. You've got to look at that picture. A Christmas tree on one side. Vice President Pence, a born-again Christian from a Roman Catholic background, above looking at the president who declares the declaration. Nothing can be more Christological in appearance than the Christmas tree, the born-again Christian, and the president who has an Orthodox Jewish daughter. This is how you teach Jews that they've got to overcome the so-called fears, rightly so for many of them, and the type of sense of you get friendly with them, what are they going to do? I don't think it's at all out of place anymore. The trouble is, and I think I told David, don't be at all dismayed when you send out an advertisement that an Orthodox Jew is coming here, on which the conclusion would be probably is a phony baloney anyway, and therefore don't come. Or if he is authentic, as people know my reputation, etc., be careful, Zev, they're going to use you. Has it ever dawned on David that maybe Zev Garber's mission is to cop one of you and bring you to shul, a young Israel, an Orthodox shul on Friday night? You understand? What are you afraid of? If you have the dialogue and a little humor, you'll find out that you really are basically doing the same thing and you're really not fighting each other. Different language with the same accomplishment, which is friendship, which is shalom aleichem, matovu, mishkanotecha Yaakov. How beautiful are the dwelling place, O Jacob.
Last question in our interview. How has your view of Messianic Jews changed over the years?
My views of Messianic Jews has changed 100% due to the gentleman to my left, due to the man Stuart Dauerman, due to Mark Kinsler, and let me begin with Mark. Messianic Jews, for a guy like me on campus at Valley College, was a trouble. All of a sudden, people came on campus with little cartoons, boom, 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 and they were cute. The Jews for Jesus movement, etc. I remember very distinctively inviting a then unknown rabbi by the name of Moshe Rosen to my classroom at Los Angeles Valley College in 1970 or 71. Moshe Rosen came into my classroom with the Messianic rabbi in the neighborhood, whom I knew because the Orthodox Jew I prayed at was right next door to a Messianic storefront. And Moshe Rosen wore a yarmulke, wore the fringes, had a beard. Hey, you Jewish? Yeah, I'm Jewish. Where's your yarmulke? You Jewish? You keep kosher? You don't like keep kosher. And down the line he went. And then finally said to my students, very cleverly done, so I violate one commandment. So I make one sin. I believe in Jesus. But you're telling me I'm not a Jew? I'm not an authentic Jew? It's very clever what he did, and for some people, it was really a sham. According to some who broke from Moshe Rosen, including the name I mentioned already tonight. When you have your missionaries of the Baptist movement, whatever to Jews, you have the old-time religion, which is the one that's suspected. You now have a Messianic movement that's clearly divided. When I hear about a non-supersessionist Messianism, meaning it's not replacement of the Jew, it's alongside the Jew, I am hearing a cry, we are also authentically Jewish, Zev. Why is the organized Jewish community threatened by us? Part of it is the imaging that goes with this. The other part is you need to have, and I make it officially declared right now, and I've got witnesses. You got to start a tradition called Yom Limud, a day of learning. You bring me, I'll bring a gang of people here. You invite the Chabad wacko, and you bring him here as well. There's nothing wrong in having these people with people myself making sure it's going to be kosher. I don't have to. I go to a home today, I see a mezuzah that gave me a heartthrob. I sit at a table, and I'm eating a vegetarian meal. I said to myself, is David going to do in the name of Jesus? I saw there was no bread at the table, and thank God for that. I said to David in very polite fashion, David, would you like to say a blessing? There's a beautiful daughter, Miriam. She said, the blessing, Shakoni Ebidvaro. She had the blessing, Bori Priya Eitz. She had the blessing of all, she had 3 different foods, 3 different blessings, and she sang it. I said, Miriam, you're the cantor of my next synagogue. This is a Messianic home. The yarmulke that David wears, I don't know if you really see anything. I've got me a libertine man. I've got everybody's color here. He's got a Hasidic yeshiva yarmulke on his head. I see a friend who I met at the SBL. He's got a knitted B'nai Akiva yarmulke on his head. It's not unusual for Messianics to feel this way and comfortable this way. And now you're inviting Amy Jill Levine to a Messianic interfaith type of, program during the summer. I was asked during that meeting, I met you, would I be interested? I guess they haven't done the research yet on me. I'm glad she's going to go there. And let me tell you now a distinction. There is a tape at Purdue University, NPR, WBA there, where my book called The Jewish Jesus was launched. And I was asked, how did I get into this type of stuff? I mentioned Amy Jill Levine's, her book on Jesus, which I reviewed, and I said, this is where I distinguish. Amy Jill sees Jesus as a prophet. I do not see Jesus as a prophet. And this is where the distinction comes in. A prophet for me, the words heard by the audience or the generation that hears his words must be fulfilled in the lifetime of that group. If it is not, then the words can be seen as futile or simply as false. I then screamed into the video. It's all online. I don't want the Jews to see Jesus as a false prophet. Failed? All right. False? No. And yet one is Orthodox Jewish and the other is Orthodox Jewish. It ought to teach you a lesson. Even the Orthodox gang is quite divided. So you Christians are not alone. It's good to have diversity. And yet the Messianic Jews need that Jewish identity. And when some Messianic rabbi says, you know, we don't follow these rabbis who killed Jesus or permitted to be killed, which means we don't have to follow that interpretation called halakha, which thou been correctly pointed out. Without that halakha, we are nobody.